This 20-minute video is to explain and show the options of what Scotland's debt would be the day before we become independent. During the 2014 first independence referendum, people that support the Union actually said some amazingly stupid and naive things to try and make it hard for people to believe in the economic case for Scotland's independence. Debt is a bad thing, as you know. Whether you're an individual, a business, a city, a county, debt, if it's much too high, stops you doing things. It stops service, unemployment, all the horrible things we know about. However, if we're actually a country, as a nation, it's a different type of debt. It's called sovereign debt, and it's no problem, as you'll see here explained in the first of two scenarios in this presentation. This talk has two sections. Scenario 1, the first section, looks at the situation where the UK's debt and the UK assets are split so that Scotland gets a share. The second scenario is called the continuing state model, and in that there is no sovereign debt, but there is debt, and it's a different way of separating two countries. So, looking at scenario 1, this is when Scotland has a share of the UK sovereign debt and the UK's total assets. Looking at assets first. The Office of National Statistics provided this information, and it was the latest information I could find. What it shows for these years here, and for trillions of pounds here, 1 trillion is 1 with 12 nothings after it, you can see how the asset value of the country has gone up to the last known figure, 10.4 trillion. You can see here the effect of the bank collapse in 07-08. I'm going to use the population share to work out our share of this debt. As you can see, Scotland has a 8.09% share of the total UK population. As an aside, this is quite interesting because in 2014 this figure was 8.32%, and although Scotland's population has gone up since then, the UK as a whole has gone up significantly. Most of that increased population is resident in England. So 8.09% of 10.4 trillion would give Scotland an asset share of the UK assets of 841 billion. Now let's look at the split of the UK national debt. The UK national debt is 2.174 trillion. Of that, nearly all of it was built up since 1945. Only 42 billion was carried over from the end of the war. In the last 75 years, the UK has borrowed money in 63 years and only paid back money in 12, the last time being 2001. The interesting thing about UK debt is that I hadn't really understood what sovereign debt was. I thought it was simply a figure, but it isn't. So I'll try to explain here because it does affect how you view debt in terms of being a country. So there's your 2.174 trillion, although I'm showing it here in billions. If Scotland took 8.9% of that, it would be 193 billion. However, following the 07-08 banking problems, over the next 4 years, the Bank of England created money out of thin air by hitting a computer keyboard. There were several tranches of this, and they called it quantitative easing. What that actually did was this money created from the magic money tree bought some of the UK sovereign debt. So the UK government was buying debt from itself based on money it created from nowhere, and this debt is dead debt because it doesn't charge the UK government, the UK state, anything. It's just a number. Our share of this would be 122 billion. This is obviously better than this, and it's because this isn't real debt. This is just a number now. It's not charging anybody interest, so it could really be deleted from the accounts and it won't make a blind bit of difference. Then we come down to these different things here. Premium bonds have been sold in the 50s and 60s onwards, and you can still buy them. It's basically an early form of lottery. You bought government debt through premium bonds, and there was monthly, quarterly and yearly payments based on your numbers, like a lottery. So what actually happened, just around £200 billion of the UK national debt is owned by the thousands and millions of people that bought premium bonds, so it is not owned by the UK government. Foreign countries also own some of the UK government's debt, to just slightly over 400 billion. And then the life insurance companies, pension funds and so on, they have bought another 515 billion, leaving 259 billion. This 259 billion is real debt because it costs the government interest. None of this here costs the government interest. So my view is this would be Scotland's share of the UK national debt. But before I go on, a word about these. These things here are the wealth engine that drives the City of London. Basically, organisations, when the stock markets are fluctuating violently or there's an issue and a drop in the market, they buy government bonds, so they give money to the UK government, and they get a small interest, about 2% or less. While the volatile market it's a way they can guarantee their money to increase slightly but not be affected by the volatile market. And it's this buying and selling of this debt that drives the City of London. Scotland's sovereign debt would probably be in the same type of thing. So what have we got? Using 1819 data, which the last I have definitely available, using population share of the debt, there's your 23 billion shown as millions. This would give us an annual debt of £810 million per annum for so many years, say 25 years, 30 years, until this was paid over. That is the current, at that time, total public budget for the Scotland expenditure. So that, as a percentage of this, gives you the load and the share that would be of this, very low. That's a turnover in 2020 of Scotland. That, as a percentage of this, is this. Bear in mind that the asset share is 841 billion. So on paper, as you can see, 841 billion could easily eclipse and pay for this debt. However, these are not two separate things. If this model is the agreed way to split it, there would first of all have to be an agreement on this figure. What is the debt that Scotland is going to accrue? My view is that that is the only debt, percentage share wise, that is actually true debt within the UK government. And this is the assets. Basically what will happen, some assets are fixed, so there's no way that the UK government can keep, say, the land of the Scottish military bases, because they are physically located in Scotland. So for those assets we have to take 100% share, and we obviously can't take our share of the land that's owned by military bases down in England, but we can take a couple of warships, we can take a few aircraft, we can take some money. So there will be a negotiation. One final thing before I leave scenario 1. Because it's easy to calculate and the information is easy to find, I used the population share, as you saw earlier, 8.09%. There is another way, where you look at the contribution Scotland has made over the decades into the UK government, which has always been positive, and there's a calculation done to arrive at a new debt figure. This would be lower than this. The reason I haven't done it is because of the complexity of finding the information. But just bear in mind, this is the higher scenario. Now to move on to scenario 2. So Scotland in this scenario doesn't get any sovereign debt, but it does have debt. First of all, what is a continuing state model? In the 70s, the Geneva Convention created a rule under the continuing state model that said, should a government and a country split into two parts, then one option is a continuing state model, when one part keeps the name and all the assets, but it also keeps all the debt. So Scotland would be liable to pay nothing towards the UK sovereign debt, which is only fair as all the sovereign debt of the country was created by the UK government, and the Scottish government has never had the fiscal authority or the fiscal powers to create sovereign debt. In the 1st of April 2017, Scotland's allowance for capital expenditure increased to £450 million in any 1 year, as long as the cumulative spend over the piece never ever exceeded £3 billion. Capital expenditure is when you buy things, build roads, repair schools, build schools. That's capital spending. Revenue spending is when you run your day-to-day business. The Scottish Government, in fact all the devolved parliaments and every county within the UK, is not by law allowed to overspend a revenue budget, so each of those organisations always end up with a very small surplus. In January 21, the Scottish Government produced this quite detailed and very interesting report about its spend plans for the next 5 years should it come back in government in the 2021 May Holyrood elections. In this, at the back at an appendix, there's this table. If you're not used to looking at this type of information, you'll be thinking, whoa, what's this? Well, let me explain. These are different years, the year 18 to 19, 19 to 20, so these are the vertical columns. And this is the capital debt at the start of each of these years. Actual, expected, projected, because obviously those years haven't happened. I'm going to use these figures here so I can compare the like year 1819 with scenario 1. 1,036 million or 1.036 billion. This row here, in that year 2018-19, the Scottish Government spent 250 million capital. This was 405 million. The expected outturn for the financial year just finishing is expected to be 300, and next year's budget will be 450. There's nothing here because it hasn't been budgeted yet. All these rows and columns here, each row relates to different financial years in the past, and it shows you the capital being repaid and the interest. Note that for this year and this year there was no interest charged. This change happened in the 1st of April 2017. So you now get a total here of how much capital was repaid based on loans. So you can see it's 28 million paid back that year to clear the capital debt. This here is the capital at the end of the financial year. So that's what it was at the beginning. That's what is expected to be at the end. And these figures here show you in this row here that the debt, various debts for various years, was borrowed over a period of time between 10 and 25 years. It also shows that the interest per pound paid varied from 0.56 of 1% to 0.97. These are projected for this year and next year, but they're estimates. So in scenario 2, for the same year, Scotland's capital debt would be this in millions, and the annual debt interest would be 28 million, which is 0.04% of the turnover and 0.57% this for the sovereign debt, a very low figure. Unlike the other one, there is no asset share. Just to show you, these are the figures taken from the previous table for the year 24-25, which has a higher public expenditure, a higher GDP, a higher capital borrowing, a higher repayment, but it still makes hardly any difference to the figures. So to summarise scenario 1 and scenario 2, it is my belief that the debt in scenario 1, our share, is very low. And these are the figures you've seen already. And this is the asset share. However, should the agreement be at the highest level, and to me the highest level is the total debt less quantitative easing, would give you Scotland's share would be 122 billion or 122 million, 1,000 million as you see here. So that would then give us an annual interest of this. And you can see the figures here, much higher. But still, even with this higher figure, this is even higher. And this may you think, oh, 55% of GDP. Remember, with sovereign debt, you pay it back slower. It's spread over a long time with low interest. Also, the current UK sovereign debt is over 100%. So this unexpectedly high figure, if it ever happened, would still be less and not really a problem. And this is the figure you can see here for Scotland. So this is the end of my debt presentation. I hope you found this interesting. But there's always a but. We have to set up our own country if we get yes in an independent referendum too. That'll take about 5 years to build up and spend, with about 30 years to pay back. Now, nobody's done the detail work to work out what this would cost, but I've read a couple of reports where individuals have put their finger in the air, assessed the speed of the wind and what direction it's come from, and come up with this figure here. You think it's a huge figure, and it is, but compare it with the previous screen where I showed you 23 billion borrowing against in scenario 1. It actually wasn't a big problem with regards to Scotland's turnover in 1819, and of course the turnover increases with time. Also think about this in terms of the COVID English track and trace, which never really worked properly, and it cost 37 billion. However, going back to this, the debt will start to get built up, this 25 billion, if that is indeed the figure, about 2 years before we're independent and about 3 years after. This is setting up a central bank. This is setting up currency. This is actually making sure that our social care systems and everything is in place so that we can run our country. This will not be a problem. And finally, some videos which you may find interesting that talk about these issues: borders, currency, pensions and the economy, to do with answering questions and issues related to Scottish independence. Thank you for listening.